being a seasoned Kenyan legislator, will, in my remarks, focus more on the Kenyan example. Because I tell people Kenya's case is unique in terms of our democracy. It's unique. You cannot find Kenya's democracy anywhere in the world. It's very unique. Kenya is the only place where on Sabasaba, 7 July 2025, if you came to this country, you think the country is burning. But the following day, 8th of July, everybody is on the road to work. It's a unique environment. You can't try it anywhere. In fact, there should be a warning on Kenya's democracy, never to apply it at all. However, I will not shy away from admitting that there is a common recited submission that coalition governments, which attempt to bring together competing logics, are considered to result in politically unstable governments that find it hard to make policy reforms. We must also, in the same breath, state that nevertheless, there are institutional mechanisms that partners can resort to in order to overcome the challenges associated with incompatible policy preferences and therefore better facilitate the policy-making process. This, for example, includes cabinet subcommittees, engagement contracts, among other things. Government of national unity have found space in many instances. Take, for example, the South African coalition government that was formed after the 1994 general election that was led by African National Congress, ANC, and was joined by New National Party and the Inkatha Freedom Party. Allow me to now revert to the topic of the moment, that is law and democracy, in the spectrum of the Great Compromise. When we speak of law, the immediate understanding that comes to the minds of many is that law refers to statutes, and you know this better, rules, regulations, orders, and ordinances. In the understanding of the masses, however, and to many hearts, law means justice, morality, reason, and order. And here, I refer to procedural rather than directive order. These two meanings of law can at times appear parallel, yet we must find convergence in their meanings for law to make sense. This is to say, for example, that the statutes must result in justice. So, for the purposes of my presentation, this unpacking of law must be coupled with the unpacking of democracy. So, therefore, what is democracy? My thesis is that simple definitions don't capture the complexity and opportunity that is democracy. If democracy is the rule of the people, then for democracy to work, all or more avenues must be applied to offer everyone's voice the opportunity to count so that their participation in their government is fulfilled. We must make sure that everyone's voice is heard for democracy to be fulfilled and for governance to be fulfilled. There must be some mandates of the kind granted to all of us. This can be realized through robust discussion, debates, voting, protesting, polling office, among others. So given these definitions of law and of democracy that I have just outlined, the need for compromise in realization of the ideal cannot be said to be surprising. Comrades, I urge you to acknowledge that laws are more often made for the people and less often the people for the law. For law to gain legitimacy, it must be deemed just. This is why, to exist and develop as a people, law and democracy in the spectrum of the Great Compromise must find legal or just space and acceptance. Legal or and just space and acceptance. So, esteemed participants, allow me to expound. Many of us view democracy very stringent or inflexible lenses. We see it as being governed by those we have freely voted in office. That's how we look at democracy. Those who garner lesser votes must play the role located for, and their voices must continue to be heard, even if it may not take the day. That is our understanding of democracy. When you are developing a nation like Kenya, a nation such as Kenya, it's however important to, it is not, I would say, how important is it? In fact, it's a question that I'm putting. How important is it to merely be heard? Just be heard. This is a developing nation where we have challenges across the land. And you want to put some people who is also forming a section of the society just to be heard. So I want to ask you, how important is it to merely be heard vis-a-vis the need for your voice to be included in determination as to how to progress as a nation? And you will see it in our constitution, trying to protect the marginalized, the minorities, trying to talk about devolution, trying to talk about addressing every section of the society. That cannot be left only to majority say. Because the majority can decide to take and grab everything for themselves. What happens to the minority? Is it sufficient just for your voice to be heard? That is what I'm asking. This is even more pronounced when the safeguards to ensure equality and equity in application is wanting, where even appropriation of resources in parliament is done by majority vote. Committee seats, how are committees formed? By majority membership. Budget committee appropriates resources for the country, yet we all pay taxes. And you say it is only sufficient to be heard. That's all. That's all. Food for thought. How do we deal with marginalization and exclusion in our midst? That is the question I'm addressing. So what then is seen to be missing in this discourse is the application of good governance. What is good governance? I say so because there is a reason why we put or elect people into office. There is an expectation that we have of them, and this is what is at times referred to as social contract. Social contract. So what is governance? In a more simplified form, I would submit that it is the framework that determines who and how decisions are made and who or how we hold them, decision makers, to account or accountable. That is what governance is all about. How decisions are made and how we hold those people who make those decisions accountable. To me, that is the simplified understanding of governance. How well that is executed defines good governance. Now let me come back to the application of these principles in our civic spaces or in our political lives and in our growth as a working and developing democracy. I would like you to again look into our governance framework and see the extent to which inclusion of the interests of all is protected. And that you can see in various statutes, including our Supreme Law, the Constitution. Comrades, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to go back to how we put the people into these decision-making spaces. That is through our regular general elections. So at any given election time, the people, more specifically the registered voters, go to an election and participate as voters. To determine the legitimacy of the result, you consider among other factors the voter turnout. That is one. Voter turnout is not merely the fact that you have won the majority votes. For legitimacy, we must look at voter turnout. It is important. And I must remind you that the said legitimacy must not just be in the statutes of law, but must also be deemed just by the masses. Lately, we have seen what happened in our neighborhood. If it was just statutes, everybody would be hailing the new leadership in our neighborhood for having done a fantastic job. Because here is a case where they have their elections according to the law, which I'm told their own statutes say that once the electoral body has made a decision, you have nowhere perception that that is a fair process. Actually, the election outcome there was 98% victory. But what is the level of legitimacy? And I don't want to criticize what happened there because I have no facts and I am a minister in a neighboring government. But this is public knowledge that there are questions around legitimacy. The masses will only accept legitimacy of control or government if they know and believe that even if they may not be in the leadership, their concerns as citizens and taxpayers will be taken into account. Then you can accept whatever outcome. Whether you were elected or not, you will feel that even whatever the outcome, your concerns will still be taken into consideration in decision making. Therefore, I put it to you that additionally, you must consider the stage of development in which a country is, as well as the level to which inclusion is mainstreamed and applied in its development agenda. The biggest problem actually we have, including in Kenya, is the feeling of inclusion. That is what has led us sometime almost to the brink of collapse. So the consideration of these factors will impact the level and extent to which the population will be tolerant of the provided avenues of participation. I will tell you, I was in this country and I was in this political space in 2007. One of the reasons why Kenya almost banned is because we felt that the legal framework that was in place was not going to give us justice. So we chose not to go to court and we decided to go to the streets. And the effect or the outcome was almost disaster for this country. So to conclude this analytical part that lays out my thesis, actually this is my thesis. I've just given a thesis. Professor, I think you know better. Maybe after this you'll mark my thesis and give me some mark. We must then go back to justice and the feeling or reality that our electoral process will present to the masses insofar as they may feel or deem that justice sustains or will continue to be served under the process. Taking all these factors into account, it is almost impossible to not see the value and space of compromise and for broad-based political arrangements if we must remain united as a nation and agree to develop together. I think in my off-the-cuff remarks, I will elaborate a little on that. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to remind you of where we work at every stage, where the late former Prime Minister, the Honorable Raila Odinga, CGH, I want to emphasize that CGH because he got it posthumously, and I think we should be proud of him. He's not here to thank the country for awarding him that. We can do it on his behalf. So I want to remind you of every stage where the former Prime Minister reached an arrangement to work with the government, rather than remain firmly in the opposition or in the minority, because that formed the gist of the discussion here. Let me start with the making of Tinga. You heard Raila being called Tinga. What is the making of Tinga? This was an arrangement, it came out of an arrangement he had with Kanu. Kanu had for far too long, during that period, been seen as an representative of the voices or interests of the wider masses. That is how we viewed Kanu. So the sustained sole governance under Kanu government, which was considered a minority, when the majority, who were not cohesive, so they were majority, but were scattered all over the place in different political parties, who were split into many whites. UDEM was not seen as legitimate, nor as democracy, and was not seen to be working. So reaching that working arrangement provided opportunity for the voices, interests, concerns of more to be considered at the table of decision making. It provided the masses an opportunity to feel that law and democracy could work for their collective good. Remember, that time, and I remember it was after the 1997 election, where we participated in an election as a National Development Party. And I this, that Kenyans were not happy to go to another election with the constitution then and with the legal framework then. Therefore, there was the call for no reform, no election. And we were on the streets. And the country was ungovernable. But then, a discussion had been initiated on the minimum reforms. Because we realized the time leading to election was too short to conduct a comprehensive constitutional review. So we had to make do with minimum reforms. And that is where Raila stepped in to provide that framework. And he became chair of the Select Committee of Parliament. And then the rest is history. We got the minimum reforms, which brought the first change in this country, where a ruling party was defeated. 2002 would have not happened. Mbadi would have not been president if we did not initiate the minimum constitutional reforms to level the playing field for the election. So that is how Raila got together with KANU, and of course the rest is history. After getting into KANU, he used his political strategies, tactics, and broke KANU. And he got people who were never imagined to leave KANU from KANU. One of them initially was Uzalendo, but he went back to KANU. Actually disappointed us there. There was the late Saitoti, who was even the vice president at one point. There was Kalonzo Musyoka, who was a KANU hawk. We had people like Mtimama. We had Mudi Awori. All those came out of KANU to join us in the opposition. Let me now move to the next one, the Nusumkati, the famous Nusumkati, the coalition government, where I served as an assistant minister. So I dare say that this is one handshake that should be excluded from analysis. This one should be excluded from analysis. Why? Well, the ECK, the Electoral Commission of Kenya, chaired by Kivuitu, as it was then, had indicated that they were unsure of who won. In fact, he said, I don't know who won the presidential election. Then Trigler came, our friend from South Africa, who was an external expert. He stated the same in his report. So if ever there was a time that any compromise was needed to steady the ship, this was one such time. People were losing their lives, people were killing each other. There was nothing happening in this country. This country was going the failed state way. If ever there was doubt that Raila's actions, or compromises, if you wish, were largely selfless, this is one instance where a man who had won proceeded to play second fiddle to a man whose win was in doubt. In fact, if it were me, if it happens when I ran for president in 2032, I would not accept. I would have not accepted. If it were me, I would have not accepted. But it was Raila, and he accepted to go into this coalition arrangement. Now let me come to the handshake. Now this is closer home. Many of you, I'm sure, are almost crossing age 18. 2022, you are too young. In 2022, you are still very young. Yes, sir. But you are old enough to appreciate this. Good governance has a large component of feeling that your interests are incorporated in the policies of the day. So do the people feel included? Do you feel included? So between 2013 and 2017, Jubilee won. The administration style left a large section of our population feeling that the cake was being largely split between a very select few communities of the land. That was the reality. So the results of the 2017 elections that afforded that administration a second term was felt to portend another 5 years of the same, and the opportunity to meaningfully engage in determining the development agenda was deemed lacking, slim, or non-existent. We felt we are going to have another 5 years of frustration. Not going to work. target. So the handshake offered that opportunity. And it steadied the ship, but just for a moment. The levels of inclusion of the interests of all in the national development agenda was, however, still no longer, not to a large extent, wanting. Let me say this. It is key to remember that meaningful democracy in the eyes of the masses could only present through sustained demonstrations and other disruptive actions. That is a very plausible one. Very plausible. But this approach, however, does not leave adequate room for the government to try. And by the way, speaking now as CS National Treasury, I would tell you that if there's anything I hate to see, is demonstrations. It just disorganizes the economy completely. One day of demonstration is too much for our economy, especially economy that is just picking up like Kenya. Therefore, if we can avoid demonstrations and other disruptive action, the better. But it may be the last resort. Make no mistake to conclude that Mbadi was calling for no demonstrations, no disruptive action. I can never do that because I know I am a product of those demonstrations. And I know demonstrations have helped to fix this country, where people became so hostile to progressive ideas. But it should be the last resort. I think my time is running out. Let me try to move a little faster. But I'm just demonstrating that demonstrations and disruptive action should be the last resort. So allowing space for those in power to implement the agenda as to assess the level that more interest are incorporated into the development agenda may not have presented the best result. That, in my opinion, is why a similar handshake post that one would not have worked to appease the masses. We could go the handshake way again, as we did in 2017. But did the handshake of 2017 to 2022 serve the interest of everyone? No. Now that brings me to the broad-based arrangement, the final. Before you allow me 2 or 3 minutes for the off, the cuff remarks, if you allow. So the broad-based arrangement. This brings me to the now where we are. We must begin from 2022, election outcome. Let us take into account the voter turnout first. And I spoke to this earlier. Voter turnout validates electoral outcome. It was only 64.7%. This means that about 35.3% of voters, of course you can give or take because there were also people who applied, but insignificant. Over 30% have their preferred choice remain unknown at the close of this key policy process. So no one knows, this 35%, who they would have voted for if they were forced to vote. But because our democracy allows you to vote when you want, or if you don't want, you don't vote, the decision of this 35% is unknown to date. So the winner, His Excellency the President, President Ruto, gathered 50.4% of the cast votes, not of the total vote, which is the cast. 50% of 64. That's just about 30-something percent. Is that correct? Yes. While the number 2, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, the date, again I want to repeat, CGH, garnered 48.8% of the cast votes. The other presidential candidates garnered about 0.44 and 0.23 each of the votes, and they will always be there. These are the people who get it. They will always be there in every election. So, you could comfortably infer that the administration had only about half of the nation moving with them, just 50%, if not less. So given the developmental history and the development stage of this nation in 2022, could the other half, not in the executive, be confident that their interests would be included in the development agenda? I doubt it. So given the spread of development projects as seen in the handshake, would a similar political arrangement have appeased the masses? if we decided to go handshake. And we saw, even under the handshake arrangement, the kind of exclusion, the kind of bias in allocation of resources, I don't think another handshake would have sufficed. So you must take this into consideration while also taking into account the fact that Raila and his ODM party was known to bring on board several regions. By the way, when you speak about ODM, you speak about a number of regions. Unlike UDA, that time, even Jubilee, if you spoke about UDA after the 2022 election, before they poached leaders from across the divide, you are basically roughly talking about two regions. They could be very populated, but there are two regions. You know the regions I'm referring to. You are talking about Mount Kenya, and you are talking about sections of Rift Valley. But when you are talking about ODM, you are speaking to coast. You are talking about Western. You are talking about Nyanza. You are talking about Northeastern. And you are talking about Nairobi. And even Rift Valley, you are talking about Kajiado, Narok, because ODM had majority votes in those counties. You are talking about Turkana. ODM had majority votes in those counties. So, ladies and gentlemen, remember that even after this election, Azimio was deemed the majority in parliament. You can refer to the court decision. This was, of course, until Kenya Kwanza started post-election signing of agreements with parties so as to gather majority in the two houses. These agreements were signed with the leaders. The extent to which these leaders were moving with the masses could be subjected to debate. Because I even saw the MP for Uganda signing this post-election agreement with Kenya Kwanza. But do you think Uganda people signed that post-election coalition before the Broadbased? I don't think so. If Uganda people were called upon to sign, they would have rejected that absolutely. But the leader went and signed. So, trying to get legitimacy. So you may recall that the stroke that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was the refusal of the executive and legislature to listen to the people. I was in parliament then, and withdraw the finance bill. There were calls to withdraw the finance bill. People were complaining about finance bill. There were good provisions in it, yes, but it was polluted with some other provisions that were offensive. So as the Mio had listened to the people, we had listened to the people ourselves. I was a very prominent member of Azimio. Actually, I was in the Economic Council of Azimio. The legislators who are from the Azimio side withdrew thereafter proposed amendments, including myself, to the bill, and chose to just vote against the whole bill. Because that is what Kenyans say. Reject. There was no talk. People were saying, we don't want to hear of any amendment. Reject. Return back to the sender. So that is what caused the need now to discuss something. So, the 2024 Gen Z uprising was widespread across the country. The Gen Zs then wanted a more tolerant and inclusive approach to the country's resource management policies. With lessons learned, the best way to do this was by being on the table in a manner that counts. In a manner that counts. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line is the continued survival of the people and of the nation. And Raila kept on repeating that we better have a nation with imperfections than having none at all. That we don't have a spare nation. If there's anything we don't have spare, and which we cannot borrow, is the nation. We can't borrow a country. You only have one. So if you have a very thin wardrobe and limited resources, and yet you must attend a formal meeting, then what do? Then that single formal trouser or coat that you have must fit you. Even if it means not breathing easily. Until after the meeting is done. You can afford to struggle with breathing until the meeting is over, but you attend that meeting. So I dare submit that we must come together and provide our best expertise at the table and steady the issue. Let us therefore commit ourselves to, as future key Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to spend the next 2 minutes for free just to speak to you on something about being on the table, because it is now what we need. So many have spoken that we don't need to discuss with the oppressors, as they put it. That we must always be in the streets. That we must fight the government of the day. Whereas that is true, that dictatorial regimes, the autocrats, have only listened to the language of agitation and street protests. But it is also true that to make any meaningful progress after protests is always dialogue and sitting on the table. And I will give you examples. In this country, I don't want to go anywhere else. You can give examples across the globe. But in this country, the colonialists came to Kenya to colonize us without being invited. They actually invited themselves to our land and our space, took over the prime land, confined us to squatters, left us no space to participate in our governance. In fact, controlled even our movements. There were various taxation laws that were imposed on us, including hard tax, that so long as you have a Simba, if you are Luo, or a Thingira, then you must pay tax, thereby putting some heart in your own company. That's how oppressive the colonial government was. There was poll tax. There was all kinds of taxes. But for us to get rid of these people and govern ourselves, we have to fight. You have read about Mau. You have read about the story of Young Kavirondo Association. You have read about very prominent Kenyans, some who are killed for agitating to get back our land and our governance structure. People fought. People were killed. Others were maimed and they died later. But at the end, we did not drive the Mzungu out of this country purely by use of arrows, spears, stones, and whatever you can call it. People had to go to Lancaster, not once, but more times, to debate, to discuss, to demonstrate them how we have intelligence to govern ourselves, to prove to them that we have reached the level where we could now think for ourselves. But they didn't believe that we could think for ourselves. Dialogue delivered independence. Then now came the independent Kenya. The first president, the second president. Then amendments were brought to the constitution to make Kenya first a de facto. Was it first a de facto, then de jure? Yes, de facto single party state, then de jure. Now you could not even form a political party. You would be chased away from the only existing political party called KANU by the late Okiki Amayo, who was the chairman. And you have nowhere to go to. So if you want to run, you have to be a member of KANU. And you have already been chased from KANU. You can't even be a councillor. Not even a village elder. All that brought agitation for pluralism, political, multi-party push. People were killed. People were maimed. People like Matiba lost their health even though they lived long after that. Rubia lost his voice. People like Raila were detained, exiled. Many people. Fortunately for me, I also participated towards the tail end of that era as a student leader, agitating in the streets of Nairobi, fighting with the police. And we used to use very derogative terminology. I don't know whether you still use those terminologies against the police. Please don't. And we fought with them until multi-party was restored. was restored, people had to sit. Now let me bring you fast forward. Fast forward to 2007. When we felt that our election outcome was stolen, again people went to the streets. People killed each other. Neighbors turned against each other. Properties were destroyed all over the country. In some places, a woman could go back to their rural home with the head of the husband only. The rest of the body is not there. It was a very painful period. Actually, it was a very bad time to be elected a member of parliament. I remember my neighbor in the village, we had to ferry the head from the Naivasha to the village. Yes, you can say it was worth it for democracy. But finally, what happened for democracy to work? What happened, ladies and gentlemen, is that Raila and Kibaki had to sit down and talk for the country to progress. Those fights, the people who were killed, who were shot dead, could not move us to the next one. We had to go to parliament late in the night to pass what we call the National Accord, to anchor the position of the Prime Minister in the Constitution and to create space for new governance where power and responsibility was going to be shared. Let me move you to 2017. Again, after the outcome of 2017 election and the Supreme Court made a ruling and all that you know, for the first in Africa, annulling the electoral outcome of the presidency. We were again back in the streets because we knew that justice was not going to be served. And we went to Urupa and made Raila people's president. And we told him from here we are going to State House direct. He used his wisdom to dissuade us from going to State House because many people would have lost their lives. And after that, after Raila became people's president, where we now have two presidents in the country, according to us, who believed in that cause. And remember, maybe you have forgotten or you can't remember, I was thrown out of parliament for saying Kenya has no president. Because I said there is no president. Who is claiming it? Raila is claiming it. So we don't have a president. I was thrown out of parliament. I was asked to apologize, withdraw, I said, what am I apologizing for? You don't know that Baba is people's president. I was thrown out. But the end result was that Raila left the country. When he came back from the airport to Mbadi, we lost 67 young Somalis. Dead, people who left their houses alive. 67 were shot between the airport and Mbadi. Did that move the country forward? No. Again, what now moved the country forward was sitting together, a handshake, and Kenyans moved forward. Now lately, you saw the sufurias in the streets, on our heads, after 2022. Then we withdrew and said, okay, let's have NADCO. Again, sitting on the table. But then, Gen Z came. And Gen Z now surprised everyone. Because this Gen Z, you know what I've never understood with it. Ikija kama wajaluo wamekuwa kwa wengi watakuwa you will translate that. I call it Nyawawa. Nyawawa is something you can never understand its origin. It just comes and wraps, and before you know it, it's gone, or it is somewhere, and it will come again. That is the Gen Z. Something that we have. But there's something that I forgot, which I will mention now that I've remembered it, that we agitated for a new constitution for so many years because we felt the constitution we had was oppressive and did not give life to human rights. There was no civil liberty in this country. There were many statutes, these orders, this order, for us to realize the have today, people had to go to the streets. We went to Kabukunji. We held rallies at Urupa. We fought with the police. But in the end, Bomas of Kenya was the route. From Bomas, some people went to Kilifi. The Wako draft was produced, which we defeated to Liangusha. But that ad for the constitution did not die. Immediately after 2007 election, we resumed. And in 2010, we delivered a constitution through dialogue, a constitution that we are very proud of today, very progressive, if it was implemented to the letter. So, as I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, many of you have asked questions around whether it was decided to have the current arrangement that we have today. I dare say that it was. Why do I say so? This is better than handshake. And this is better than the other arrangements. Why? Because it is not just about being heard. You should be in a position to be able to influence decision. And I will give you just one example and I go and sit down, because maybe you'll ask me questions. I don't know how you arrange it. Today, you know ODM stands for inclusivity, fighting for the marginalized, and the minority. Today, I can visit a river and I see for myself that since independence, for over 60 years, the children who go to school are eaten by crocodiles as they cross the river because there is no bridge of 100 million children. If we were not in these arrangements, where I can make decision that I would only be heard, I would only speak in parliament and lament how those children are dying. That's government's idea. But because I'm in that space, I could take a decision, put it in the budget, and come and report to the cabinet that I've already put this money in the budget, and ask parliament to approve. And today, 2 bridges are nearing completion in Tana River, stopping what has been decades-old sufferings of those people. What I'm saying in short is we need a space where every voice also counts, not just being heard. That yes, you have said your bit, that is the end of it. No. If we can be inclusive as possible, how I wish that all regions would be in the cabinet, all communities would be in the cabinet, everybody would be in the cabinet making decisions, everybody would be in parliament having equal voice. That would be the perfect democracy that we are calling for. But because it is not possible, we should be as broad as possible. We should be as inclusive as possible. Even going forward, any electoral outcome which will exclude a section of this society is a recipe for chaos. Thank you very much. May God bless you.